Hi guys, I'm Kristen. This is Kristen is Fully Booked. Today I'm going to share some fantasy recommendations with romantic subplots you can root for. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you've probably picked up on the fact that I am always up for a good romantic subplot, or just as part of the main plot. I'm really on board with rooting for romance in my books. But I know that not everyone else is as into hearing about the romantic relationships in the characters of their books. So today, in honor of Valentine's Day, I thought I would share a few fantasy recommendations, both young adult and adult fantasy, with more romantic subplots that are less of the main plot, but with romances that are happening in the background that you can really root for, whether or not you are a big romantic reader. Now, the focus on the romantic relationships is different in each of these books, so how much the relationship really is part of the plot. So I'm going to present them on a sliding scale from less of a priority focus on the romance to more so of a focus on the relationship. I'll start off with the young adult books. And again, we're doing this sliding scale both within this category and the next one. So the young adult recommendation here that I think has the least amount of focus or priority focus on the relationship, but still is a romantic coupling that you can really pair for, is the relationship in the book Raybear. Now, admittedly, I haven't read the second book in this duology yet, so I don't know how much of a focus the relationship continues to be in the second book, so I can't comment on that. But in this first book, I think that the relationship that develops is very slow. It's very cute, but it is definitely in the background. There is so much more going on in this young adult book. It is African inspired. It is set in a very politically interesting world. And our main character is created by her mother to serve a sole purpose of killing the Raybear, which is the heir to the throne in this world. Through this process, she becomes very close, and the relationship here, I would say, is not as obvious as you think it's going to be, and it is a little bit complicated by the closeness of all of the characters within this found family group. That isn't to say that it is a love triangle, it's definitely not the case, but you might feel a little bit conflicted or unsure of what the relationship is going to be. But again, it's very much in the background, with the focus so much more on the progression and growth and development of our main character, Terry Sai. But you do have these really cute, sweet moments with the relationship as it slowly develops in the background as all of these characters grow up over the years. I do think this is a young adult series. It has enough content and plot and world building that adult readers are going to be satisfied with this series as well. It obviously reads a little bit younger, but there's enough meaty content to the world, the politics, and the themes that are discussed that adult readers are definitely going to be satisfied, even if you don't normally read a young adult book. The next young adult fantasy series with a romantic subplot you can root for is Shadowfell by Juliette Marillier. This series has just the cutest little spot in my heart. It is an adorable series. It is a little bit cliche or a little bit tropey. It's not angsty YA tropey at all, but just a little bit cliche, where we have a main character, Naren, who has a magic previously thought to be lost. She's sort of a chosen one. She joins in a rebellion to overthrow this evil for the sake of evil king. But within all of that, you have the adorable but very bittersweet background story of Naren and the person who she slowly falls in love with over the course of the trilogy. If you like the sick and being taken care of trope, the first book in this series has that in just the sweetest way, because at the same time you're still unsure of the intentions of the person who is taking care of Naren when she is sick. One of the things I think is really cute and special about the romantic relationship here is that it is not spent a lot of time on, because the two characters, they are both within the rebellion, but they play different roles. And because of this, they are actually separated for significant portions of each of the three books. They are very rarely in the same place. So for those moments when they do get to be in the same place, when they do get to be together in each of the three books, the moments are just so adorable because the characters themselves know how special those moments are. This comes through not only in the way that the characters are experiencing, but in the way that it is written. So it feels like really bittersweet because you don't always get to see them together, but the moments that they do get to be together are just so heartwarming. It is YA, so everything is fade to black. And again, we're mostly focusing on the rebellion. We're focusing on Naren's growth and coming into her own, her learning about the magic that she has. but this small subplot in the background with these cute meetups are absolutely worth reading this book for. And next up in the young adult category, which has a little bit more of a focus on the relationship, is The Fable Duology by Adrienne Young. While more of a focus, the relationship here as it builds is very subtle. It is all about what is distinctly not said, but so much more about the actions in spite of what might have been said. This romance is all written in between the lines of the book, and you get to really start to care in the second half of the books when things begin to get a little bit more obvious, but still very tense. This duology follows our main character, Fable, who when she was a young girl was abandoned on an island of miscreants by her sea captain father, and she's on a mission to find her father again because she really wants to prove herself and to be a crew member on his ship. In doing so, or on her journey off of that island, she gets onto another boat, and this boat is captained by West, who makes it very clear with his words that he does not want Fable on his boat. However, as I said, it's all about the actions here and not about what is said to each other. While this book largely focuses on Fable's growth, her coming into her own, her confronting her father, and the complicated relationship between those two characters, we do also definitely focus on the relationship or the growing tension with Fable and West. And the relationship is much more a deciding factor in plot events in the second book, where things that are happening with that relationship start to change the dynamic and the plot events of everything else. The one thing that I will say about this relationship over the course of the two books is that it's not straightforward. It's not only ooey gooey, romantic, and sweet. It is complicated. The two characters both have pretty traumatic pasts, and they have ways that they deal with that trauma, and that is reflected in how they act in this relationship. The last young adult recommendation here, and the one that has definitely the most focus on the romantic relationships throughout the series, is the Crown of Feathers series by Nikki Palprado. In this trilogy, I do think that the romantic relationships between a couple different couples is a pretty big priority focus throughout the trilogy. It has two very, very adorable relationships that we focus on throughout the trilogy, and there's sort of an additional romantic relationship that develops between two additional characters in the third book. But the two original pairings are the ones that have the biggest place in my heart, and definitely the more focus over the course of the trilogy. We have Tristan and Veronica, who are Phoenix Riders. This one is so cute. It starts off as a hate to friend to love, pretty slow burn over the course of the first two books. Definitely in the second book, you know that there is tension. The other relationship is a male-male relationship between Sev, and I am really struggling to remember the other guy's name. He's not a POV character. It starts with a K. Anyway, it is also really cute, but while Tristan and Veronica's relationship is a little bit more smooth in its growing, Sev's budding relationship, which is also hate to friend to love, is a little bit more rocky in its development. And that has a lot to do with Sev's lack of confidence in himself. I can't spend a ton of time talking about each of the relationships individually, but I'll say that you're definitely going to be rooting for these kids to figure things out, to be able to get together finally. Both of the relationships do have pretty good communication here over the course of the trilogy, which I do think is so important in a young adult novel. It's nice to show these characters in their teens communicating when they are hurt, what they need, when they are frustrated, communicating their feelings, and in a non-angsty, dramatic way that some young adult books tend towards. We also get a reunion scene with each of those relationships in the third book that were both so satisfactory. One goes the way that you absolutely want it to go. It's so perfect. It is so exactly what you want. The other one is a little bit less smooth. So you get both a really great reunion scene and a reunion scene that is a little bit complicated. But over the course of this trilogy, you're just going to be rooting for these kids to work things out and be together. And it's so, so adorable when it does. Okay, those are all the young adult fantasy recommendations. Now we're going to switch over to the adult fantasy books. Again, going from the ones that I think have the lowest focus on the romance, on the relationship itself, and leading into a series that I think is actually fantasy romance. Okay, I'm going to start off with one that I don't think anyone would ever describe as being a fantasy romance, and this is the Live Ship Trader series. But I think that there are two relationships that take place in this trilogy that are between people you are going to be rooting for. It's difficult to talk about either of these relationships without spoiling the events of the trilogy and how each of these situations concludes. So I'm not even going to tell you who is involved, because as soon as I say it's this character or this character, you're just going to know. So I'm not going to name names here. There's a few possible relationships, I guess, to mislead you. So I don't think this is going to be obvious, but I will try to say what I want to say without spoiling. So one of the things that I like about both of these relationships is that it involves very flawed people. So the relationships as they develop in the background of this political situation with these live ships, with these traders, with the pirates, all of that is happening within live ship, the relationship is not smooth. It's not meet, see each other, cute, fall in love, like angst, tension, perfect, happy ever after. That's not the way that these two relationships progress over the course of the trilogy. There are ups and downs. There are times in one of them where you're not even sure if you want these people to be together. You do. There are times where you're not sure about the level of interest of either of people involved in these situations. There are mistakes made. There are cute moments. It is very highs and lows, realistic relationships that are developing in the background of the main plot. And I love that. I love that especially for a book that is very character focused, because that's so realistic. But I also love it for a situation like Win Live Ship, where this isn't the focus. The focus is not the romantic relationship at all. And so if it had that perfect, smooth, like meet, like each other, tension, get together, happy ever after, if it had that plot line for the romance in the background, it would be super boring. But because there is tumultuous events in both of these relationships, you're rooting for them that much more. The next adult fantasy series that I'm going to recommend is A Course of Dragons. This does have a great queer relationship that is a little bit in the background. It's definitely a little bit more prevalent than the relationships, I think, in live ships, but it's not the main focus of the series by any means. It is also definitely a slow burn. We are 4 books into a 5-book series, and the relationship really just finally becomes decisive in the 4th of those books. I'm not sure how much to spoil here. The relationship here begins as a true love triangle. We have Kieran, we have Terace, and we have Janelle. And at the beginning, each of those possible pairings are super into each other, except Kieran is very, except for Kieran, who is described even by the author as the ultimate disaster bisexual. He really denies that there is any sexual tension or interest between himself and Terace, but you can see all throughout that first book, so obviously he's in denial, and there is something there between them. The reason that this is such a great relationship to root for is because each of these possible 3 pairings you totally would want to see happen. If you want to know more about this series, check out, I do have a Should You Read This series where I go into specific details about the weird wonderfulness of this series and this relationship, and I am purposely being vague about what I mean by this relationship. This relationship is definitely a huge component to why this is such a great series. It's not the focus, but because of the past lives, the extreme history here that is involved in this overall series, the interactions between these 3 characters are really significant every time that it happens. And the more and more that you learn about the world, about the history, about the past lives of all of these characters and how they might have all known and interacted with each other in the past, the more and more that you learn over the course of the 4 books in the series so far, the more that you are invested in this relationship. Even if you are someone who really doesn't want to focus on the relationship, on the romances that are happening, but you appreciate a good, well-written one in the background of a complete fantasy setting, which is exactly the whole point of this video, this is definitely that case. Continuing on the path of the romance being a little bit more of a priority, a little bit more of a focus, I'm going to go with the 7 Waters series by Juliette Marillier. Specifically, though, I am referring to the first 3 books. This is a 6-book series, but I would say the feel of it is like 2 trilogies back to back. And I do think that in this case, I'm referring to the romances and the relationships in the first 3 books. This is a generational series, so we're not focusing on a single relationship taking place over 3 books. We are focusing on 3 separate relationships in a generational pattern. Each of the 3 relationships is very different. We have an enemies to lovers, and friends to lovers situation in the 3 books in the series in that order. But even though the first 2 books are enemies to lovers, they're done very differently. Now, the relationship in each of these 3 books is a little bit more of a focus than it is in the books that I've talked about previously. But there is a significant world, plot, and historical setting that is happening here. It's just that the romance is definitely a focus. But overall, in each of these 3 books, you're going to get this whimsical, atmospheric, environmental, historical setting with a very romantic, but not always straightforward or angsty. These have more of your fairy tale style of a romance, more so than something else. The last adult fantasy recommendation here I'm going to make is The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen. This one I think is or would qualify as fantasy romance, but I think that the weighting between the plot and the romance is going to be enough that those fantasy readers, if you're just in the mood for a little bit more romance than usual, this is a good book or a good duology. It's not really a duology. This would be a good series to pick up because the focus is a lot more on the romance, but it still has a very captivating and dynamic plot and world building. This is one of those I came here to kill you tropes where Lara is one of the many daughters of this king of a kingdom, and from childhood, he is raising all of them to eventually assassinate their future husband. When it is time for the political marriage to happen, Lara is the daughter that is chosen, sort of, and she goes off to marry the king of a different country who she is supposed to first spy on, learn how to take down the country, and then possibly kill. But things are not exactly as Lara has been told. The relationship is very slow to develop. It is one that has immediate physical attraction, but because of the dynamic between these 2 characters, where the one is pretty sure that she's a spy, but doesn't know for sure, whereas then we're in Lara's head and we know that she is a spy and is trying to take down Aaron. But Lara does see that Aaron is not exactly what she has been told to expect. So over the course of these 2 books, you get a really interesting romantic subplot because you, in the first book, are kind of wanting them to get together to realize that things are not what they think. And then in the second book, you feel really conflicted because mistakes were made. Things had significant impacts. So it is a really great relationship arc. And as I said, for the fantasy reader who is not super hung up on romance, but maybe wants an opportunity to read a little bit more romance than before, the plot and the world building here are going to give you enough of what you are looking for. You are going to be interested in what is happening here politically. I haven't spent too much time on this, but Lara plays very spy kind of role in the first book and very badass warrior role in the second book. So there's lots of action, there's lots of drama, there's lots of politics and intrigue and scheming and a really cool, lush world. It is not super spicy for those people who are turned off by that. It is a little bit more spicy than your average adult fantasy book, but it is not, again, sensationalized and as descriptive as your average Sarah J. Maas or Blood and Ash kind of a fantasy romance. Okay, so those are all of my fantasy recommendations with a romantic subplot that you can root for even if you are not super into reading romance. Do you have a fantasy series recommendation, either YA or adult, where there is a really great romantic subplot that you think that the average fantasy reader would be on board with rooting for, even if it's not the priority? In honor of Valentine's Day, we'll go with a Cupid emoji. If you just want to let me know that you are still here, that you made it to the end of the video, put a Cupid emoji in the comment section down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like what I do here. I'm very close to 500 subscribers, so that is the next sort of milestone and goal that I am reaching for. I post videos on every Monday and Thursday. I will see you guys next time. Have a great day. Bye.